Hello there and welcome. It's another time to discuss issues that concern the markets, the economy, and by extension, you, the viewer. This is Markets Insights on Sick News Television today, Tuesday, the 27th of August, 2024. I am David Chiedu. On the program today, we're discussing the issues of food harvest in the country. Essentially, we are going to be taking a look at circumventing the challenges with regards to the aforementioned in the country. Now, recently we heard about the dropping of food prices in the country, but farmers across the board now seem to paint a much grimmer picture of Nigeria's imminent food prices this year. Now, the recent flooding in the country has further worsened the situation to crisis levels, or if you like, to crisis proportions. Now, food waste, food spoilage, and loss all come together to account for a large percentage of all food that is produced, leading to a slew of additional issues like poverty that in turn unleash a high economic burden on the country. But it does seem rather worse at this point in time because the country hardly experiences floods and drought at the same time without more problems arising. Now, as things stand currently, the federal government and state government alike seem to struggle a lot to prevent poor national harvests this year as the country is plagued by the twin disaster, which I've mentioned, that farmers fear the most, which are drought and flood. Now we're taking a look at the issues and ways to get around them in order to foster food security in the country. And joining us to have this conversation today on the program is, first of all, Professor Christogonus Daudu. He's a professor and subject matter specialist, farming systems and soil science extension at the National Agricultural Extension and Research Liaison Services at the Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria. Good morning, Professor Daudu. Thank you for joining us. If you can hear me.
Good morning. A pleasure to be with you this morning.
Good morning. And also joining us is Mr. Daniel Black. He is a youth development advocate and consultant with extensive experience in agriculture, as well as youth-focused initiatives. He's also the national head, YALI Network, Nigeria. Good morning, Mr. Black. Thank you for joining us, if you can hear me.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Nice to have you join us as well. But we're going to start with you, Professor Daudu. The issues right now, of course, are what I've mentioned, plaguing the country, and it's scaring the farmers witless at this point in time. As you were, we have a number of states, 10 in particular, that have been hit by floods so far. We're talking about Kano State, Kaduna State, Jigawa State, Nasarawa, Taraba, Bauchi, Zamfara State, Yobe, Sokoto, and Kebbi State all together have been hit heavily by flood. Now, those states put together account for 50% of the country's food production every year. Kogi and Kwara, on the other hand, which are also, big producers, have been battling drought conversely. Now, with many expressing fears of losses, as it were, occasioned by these disasters I've mentioned, we know that, it doesn't particularly look good, as it were. But in your view as an expert, sir, how bad is it and how much worried should we be on the overall?
I think we have enough grounds to be worried because it's just the beginning. And like you have rightly said, in some locations you have issues of drought. In some locations you have issues of flood. There are issues that also have occurred before now in terms of timeliness of planting. Because of climate change, there's a lot of changes that have had to do with the farming systems. And taking cognizance of the fact that Nigeria is a predominantly rain-fed agricultural system, this implies that changes in this have significant effects on the farmers. To further worsen this is significant proportion of our farmers are smallholder farmers, meaning that they have challenges in accessing resources, they have challenges in assessing issues related with extension, and most importantly, they have challenges in assessing issues of insurance. So it's quite worrisome. And for us, I think your call to put this on the front burner is quite important and necessary. Vis-a-vis that a coalition of actors will be required to address this issue. This will include the government, that's the public sector, the private sector, and of course, even the farmers and communities themselves. We need to work together to see what options are available to mitigate. Some options are already too late because before now, there was prediction of this flood. There were predictions of the drought. So what ought to have happened was there is NIMET, the Nigerian Meteorological Association, the Nigerian Meteorological Organization, which provides seasonal forecasts, and it had already made some of these forecasts available. But how much of this information was available to farmers to take advantage is one option. How much information was available to the farmers to be able to make necessary adjustments to their farming practices, another option. And also, because of whatever challenges government may be facing, how much preparations were put in place to ensure that these challenges are mitigated are another issues. So, but like I said, it's still quite worrisome, but there are still some options that we can use to see how we can strengthen and mitigate these food loss.
Now, let me come to you, Mr. Black. There are also some fears of inconsistent rainfall as part of the issues plaguing harvest this year, 2024. It's also a cause for worry. What's your take on this? Because on the one hand, you have flood. On another front, you have drought. And then, of course, there is the inconsistency of rainfall in some other, portions of the country that, of course, has been said could have a knock-on effect on, post-harvest activities, as it were. What's your take on this, Mr. Black?
Yeah, thank you very much once again for having me, News. And I'm very excited at the introduction that the professor has just given. And it is a very simple thing. It's unfortunate that in Nigeria we are more of a reactive country than a proactive one. And like the professor has mentioned, most of these forecasts has been given, and we have not had a government or a people or an institution that has been very reactive, that has been very proactive. When these forecasts were given, as at last year, we had so many people talking about that we are going to have serious food wastage, serious flood, serious drought this year. We had in fact, the surge in prices of food was something that it was on the mouth of everybody, because we saw the ripple effect removal of subsidy had in the economy. We saw the ripple effect the dollar inflation, the inflation of the naira had on the economy. But unfortunately, we were hearing a whole lot of these problems and we were not hearing a whole lot of these solutions. And the professor has also mentioned that a majority, about as at the last statistics, we had about 60 to 70% of the people producing food for Nigeria are subsistence farmers, are rural smallholder farmers who do not have access to this information. Did we have government agencies? Did we have CSOs? Did we have different institutions trying their best to sensitize these food producers, these primary food producers, on the impact, on the meaning, the simple meaning of these forecasts, of these thoughts? So these people were just busy in their farms doing what they have been doing over many years, not knowing that things have changed. The concept of climate change is something that has come over, and in as much as we have people arguing that Nigeria may not be a major contributor to the climate change, but that has not excluded Nigeria from also being part of the effect of climate change. Right now, we have very, very unpredictable, very, very irrational rainfall pattern in the country. And farmers that had planted with the full conviction of that the rain normally falls by this particular time, in different clusters of farmers that I have been part of, I have had people crying after planting over 10 hectares of maize and there is no water. If you go to your state, there is so much cry for water, requesting, asking, as in, when people are despondent and are just, they do not know where to ask, whether to ask government, whether to ask God, who to ask for.
Mr. Black, are you there?
And
Okay,
you see,
I
water
think
is a very
we
key component
have a
to
bit of a connection issue with Mr. Black. We're going to get him back on, but let's move swiftly to Professor Daudu. Professor, can you hear me still?
I can hear you, please.
Professor, let's now bring that thought back to you. He was talking about, he was addressing the issue I raised earlier with regards to inconsistent rainfall and how some parts of the Southwest, have been complaining about said issue. But then again, with all of that established, let's take a look at what it does mean for the wider economy. What are the implications on the value chain, first of all, Professor, and the wider economy? We'll talk about how to circumvent that much later on as we go deeper, because there's some attendant issues. But let's talk about the immediate implications.
The immediate implications, one, it's that a lot of smallholder farmers are going to be both economically and food security challenged. Mainly because in terms of from beginning, like I tried to make you understand, because the onset of the rain varied. So many farmers planted at the onset of the rains, meanwhile the rains had not established. So they had already incurred economic losses. This was further worsened again by either a variation in the time of the drought. There's usually a mid-season drought, but not significant. But what you had this time was prolonged drought for almost 3 to 4 weeks instead of 1 to 2 weeks. And so this also had its effects on crops, on the farmers. Then to now worsen it, what you have occurring across or being reported across several states, flood. Now, in some of these, it was possible to have mitigated. So, but this means that depending on what crop and which crops farmers were able to plant, well, I give an example. Many of the farmers grow maize and rice. Now, unless they were able to make choices in terms of either drought tolerant or flood resistant choices in crops, they will be expecting 30 to 50% or even more loss in yields. This is also worsened by the fact that the cost of inputs this year was particularly high. So they were not, many of them are not able to get loans. So that makes the situation even more precarious. To further worsen the situation is the absence of mitigation of supporting facilities, lack of insurance. Is based on a survey we did in Kaduna and Niger last month, we found that less than 10% or much less than 10% of our farmers have access to insurance. So the scenario is actually worse than what you are saying. We are only hopeful that the flood will reduce before the end of the season, and farmers might be able to take up other mitigation strategies. But there is need to begin to raise alarm to necessary agencies and necessary bodies to see what structures need to be put in place to strengthen or mitigate or help the farmers to be resilient to the current and incoming challenge.
Now, Professor, let's stay with that thought. For smallholder farmers, certain crops certain crops that need to be planted at a particular time of the year in order to thrive. Now, if it doesn't happen that way, there's obviously a problem. So, can you walk us through some in-season alternatives, possibly, that would help their cause, so that post-harvest, for perishable crops, for instance, like tomatoes, you mentioned rice and the other one, but how about these other kinds of crops, in-season crops? So at the end of the day, they have issues. So if you can prefer some alternative, if you like, that can help their cause, as I mentioned, in season, so that post-harvest, they, are not particularly devastated.
Yes, I will speak to both pre and in season. You see, because in Kaduna State, where I'm based, I work at the university. Unfortunately, we had an AGRA-funded grant to do some work in Kaduna State. So for that, for the farmers who were able to work with, we were able to get the NIMET prediction pattern and was able to advise farmers on what particular crops they need to plant and what variety of crops they need to plant, and even advise them on when to plant. So, and then we're able to support them with regular feedback in terms of forecast weekly and 3-day forecast by NIMET. But what is of relevance now is the season is far advanced, is mid-season. So what is of relevance is, depending on where you are, for example, in the north here, we expect that the rains, rather than ending September or early October, will extend to mid-October. This means that you can still take advantage to plant what we call early maturing varieties of crops. You can also take advantage to plant crops that you now take the advantage and see how you can synchronize. For those who want to plant cowpea, it's either you choose using the duration of the cowpea variety you want, you go ahead with that. For tomatoes, yes, you may need to be a little cautious because the rains are still going to be heavy and may still have effects on the crop itself. So it depends on what location you are, but what is critically important is how do we work with to take advantage and let farmers be aware that in your particular ecology or part of the country, the rains are likely to extend to a particular period, and then you can now have to plan for that. Then the next issue comes into marketing and post-harvest. Because of the elongated rainy season, it means that you may have strategies to see how we can support drying of the harvest crops. We may also be wise enough to see how we can begin to see options in which we can strengthen farmers' access to markets so that as their products are being due for harvest, you already have people who are willing to take it off them. So these are some of the quick, low-hanging options we could look at.
Thank you very much, Professor. I'm going to come back to your thoughts, the last one, particularly access to markets. We're going to get into the how in the coming minutes. But let me come back to you, Mr. Black. You were sharing your thoughts with us earlier. If you could continue with that, but also add to that, some other aspects of the challenges that smallholder farmers go through, access to their markets. In most cases, they have difficulties with that, and it leads to them receiving low prices from the sales of their products. What are your thoughts on this?
Okay, so yeah, thank you so much. I had a little internet glitch, and I was trying to talk about the reactive nature of Nigeria, both from the people and the government, and then this has really been a contributory factor to the challenges that we are facing now, because projections and forecasts were made, and then we expected research agencies, we expected government agencies to rise up to the fact and ensure that at least if we can get 60% of the farmers ready for these projections. And how would they have been ready? We were talking about ensuring putting irrigation patterns into place, understanding the water flow pattern in every environment, and ensuring that we are able to channel water in our farms to reduce, if not totally stop out, flood. And you see, this flood, if properly channeled, if our farming areas are properly designed, we could actually maximize the flood to become a water storage for our crops and all that. So, but we did not, these things are not happening. And with low access to finance for the smallholder farmers, they cannot do these things as individuals. Most of these ideas are things that they know, things that they would love to do. For those suffering from drought, there are irrigation materials that they can actually buy, but these irrigation materials are very expensive to buy and to actually install. So there always is that need. There always is that place for government intervention, because food is a serious business. Food goes just beyond a regular business. It is the mainstay of any economy. The moment we have a challenge in the food production system, then you understand that almost all components of the economy will be affected by that. So we are talking about access to finance for farmers. We are talking about access to information in their own understanding. We cannot be dishing out information as if we are giving to university graduates or professors. We have to dish information knowing that the major implementers or the major users of this information are people that are majorly illiterate, and we have to begin to redesign our information dissemination system to fit into that thing, because like I keep saying, this is something that we would have mitigated by almost 50 to 60% if we were able to get the information down and also provide the necessary infrastructure for these farmers to be able to adapt. It's basically climate adaptability, to be able to adapt. The professor had mentioned that we have crops that are hybrid crops that have been produced to adapt to different weather and different soil patterns. How many of these farmers are aware of this, and how many of them have access to get these things? This is where government should come in, making sure that we are able to make the people, the primary food producers, have access to these different kinds of. So if there is a prediction of drought in a particular region of the country, we should look at the distribution system of the inputs to be inputs that are drought resistant. That is what the farmer should have access to over there. If we are talking about flood, we should be going there and implementing farm designs, proper farm designs that could channel water properly away from the farms into storage systems that could be used for the future. So there's a whole lot of these things that needs to be done. And the moment Nigeria turns over from being a reactive to being a proactive system, we will be able to mitigate these things by far, because I need you to know that these challenges are not challenges faced by Nigeria only. The climate activity, the erratic rainfall system is a global pandemic, but the effect and the level that it is affecting us is dependent on how well prepared we were for it. And I dare say we were not prepared for it.
All right. He sums that up with us, and by us I mean Nigeria, not particularly being prepared
like the professor
for the upheavals. But let's come back to you, Professor. Mr. Black has talked about government interventions, and he's also talked about access to financing, sort of kind of like how you alluded to loans much earlier in your, in your remarks much earlier. But as I mentioned not too long ago, that we were going to talk about the access to the market, which you talked about as well in your previous submission. The question right now is how? It's easy to talk about it, but really, truly, underneath it all, when all is said and done, when the chips are down, how do these smallholder farmers, which for all intents and purposes, or who rather for all intents and purposes, are very critical stakeholders in the agri sector, how do they get access to the market, from farm to table, as you were?
Is no one cap fits all solution to the quagmire of problems we're in. And one bedeviling issue cutting across all the challenges we are facing in agriculture, including this climate challenge, is the collapse of what we call public extension. These are people who are usually paid by governments to address farmers' issues and also take farmers' problems back for feedback. Permit me to speak a little on this. Before now, in the 80s up to the mid-80s, we had the World Bank funding our agricultural extension systems. So we had what we call agricultural development projects. These projects had what we call grassroots extension agents working with the farmers. At that time, one extension agent was speaking to between 800 to 1,000 farm families. Even at that time, which is the peak and the best we have ever been, it was much higher than the recommended rate of one extension agent speaking to 500 farm families. Currently, as you probably may know, Nigeria is a very data poor country. We are not able to actually ascertain the number of extension agents we have. My institute does some research, and even that is a very conservative estimate. One extension agent currently speaks to between 10 to 20,000 farmers or farm families. It's terrible. And it remains a challenge to either mitigating climate change, helping farmers to access improved knowledge, or even helping farmers, I'll get there quickly now, or even helping farmers to address issues of market access. It is very unlikely that any World Bank or agency will ever be able to employ the number of extension agents we need. So we need to enable with ICT. So that's where I'm going to go. You see, Nigeria is a very large country, and you have in some places people looking for a product. You have in other locations people looking for where to sell their product. I'll give an instance that happened about 5 years back. Some people left Niger to go and sell their rice for milling and other issues. Some people also left that same Niger to go to a location to see where they could buy rice. So part of this is lack of information as well, as clearly explained by my colleague, Mr. Black. So one of the things we need to do is we need to have ICT-enabled options to provide market access. One of these has been, there's a federal government project called the National Farmers Helpline. The NLS was working with the Federal Ministry of Agriculture to have a farmers helpline that you could call and...
Are you there? All right, Professor, we're going to come back to you very shortly. Another technical hitch, but we will sort that out and return with the conversation just after the break. You're still watching Market Insight, by the way, here on Souk News Television this morning. Stay close. We'll be right back.
Get ready to feel the pulse of the world around you. Welcome to Souk Pulse, your insert track on the stories that matter most. From the hearts of breaking news to the forefront of culture and innovation, Souk Pulse brings you the stories shaping our world every week. On Souk Pulse, we'll deep dive into the topics that drive our lives, from the latest in technology and science to politics, culture, and
investment, courage, and that commitment in spite of the challenges that entrepreneurship presents in Nigeria in particular.
Perception is propaganda, malinformation, misinformation can be created for you to perceive a certain thing that is false. Sometimes it's true, but many times it's false.
There's no state you go to in the world where you don't see construction that is consistently ongoing. No matter how developed Dubai is, they still construct roads on a daily basis.
We are no longer enjoying the light we normally enjoy. And the university vice chancellor said, it now costs me about 300 million, some 250 million to begin, 250 million to 300 million a month.
Governments should develop a particular product that will be of national value and, if possible, exportable to other countries from their own local government.
Whether it's the next big innovation, a political shakeup, or cultural phenomenon, Souk Pulse is there, bringing you the story with clarity and context.
You're not just only getting informed, you also become a solution. Then the business part of it. Then we talk productivity. Then you know you're on Souk Pulse. It's that time of the day where we tell you, go, get your friends, your neighbors, those you quarreling with, those you have issues. This is time to talk. We tell you, yeah, we don't keep quiet. It doesn't matter what policies are affecting you. It doesn't matter what the papers, the prints are telling you in your own side or the neck of the wood or your nation, or what business are pushing, profits, losses, what the stock market is talking about right now, what the Asian market is talking about right now. A whole lot of people are running down to their portfolios and trying to grab, sell off, or get some hedge. But in all this, we just say, let's talk. Your talking can make somebody better, give someone an idea.
Join us on Souk Pulse every day by 4 p.m. as we explore the heartbeat of the world's most compelling stories. Don't miss Souk Pulse on Souk News Television. Tune in and stay ahead of the curve.
Welcome back to Market Insight here on Souk News Television. We're still talking about food harvest in the country and circumventing the challenges attached therein. Having joined us so far are two gentlemen, experts in the field, as you were, Professor Christogonus Daudu, who's a professor and subject matter specialist, farming extension or farming systems and soil science extension at the National Agricultural Extension and Research Liaison Services, Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria. Also having joined us, or joining us as he wears, Mr. Daniel Black, who is a youth development advocate and consultant with extensive experience in agriculture and youth-focused initiatives. He's also the national head, YALI Network, Nigeria. I'm going to come back to you, Professor. You were walking us through the methods of access to markets for particularly smallholder farmers. We lost the connection there with you, so if you can round up your thoughts, and then, we can look at other matters.
Let me quickly just say three things. One, we need to strengthen smallholder farmers access to price and commodity and market information using digital options. I also give an example of the National Farmers Helpline. We also need to see options on how we can strengthen contract growing or aggregators to reach out to farmers. We also need to strengthen farmers being able to collect their produce and being able to collectively market their produce. We also need to see options in which we can integrate market pricing, market commodity prices and related options into their mobile devices. Our recent study found that WhatsApp and Facebook are one of the most common options by farmers to access information in terms of social media. But we believe that, for example, the WhatsApp option is a more effective means to communicate information to farmers in real time in terms of commodity prices. So basically, three: strengthening grassroots access of commodity farmers to institution, strengthen and integrate ICT options for farmers to be able to access and take advantage of market and commodity prices, and also address and link to linkages to buyers and aggregators in the market, including contract growers. Thank you.
Right. Now, let me come to you, Mr. Black, for the next question. I was going to ask Professor Daudu, but I'm going to ask you instead, Mr. Black, and I'll tell you why in a moment. Now, let's talk about what government has done or is doing, as he were, to deal with a lot of these issues, as we have known them to be. Now, taking a look particularly at some of the efforts being made by the federal government in recent time, particularly over the years, and coming down to recent time, what they have done and the various programs that they have implemented, to promote food security, boost local production, and also increase agricultural yield and productivity, as he were. Some of these programs include the ATA, that is the Agricultural Transformation Agenda, the National Agricultural Economy Revitalization Program, and the Anchor Borrowers Program as well. Even institutions, now this is why I'm asking you this question as opposed to Professor. Institutions like the National Agricultural Extension and Research Liaison Services, which Professor represents, provide, that is set up to provide support to farmers. In your view, Mr. Black, how would you say that these programs have fared? How effective would you say that they have been, in your view, that is?
Yeah, all right. Thank you so much. And I'd want to take this question as a representative of the young people that have majorly been a target, or that are presumed to be beneficiaries of these intervention programs. First and foremost, I'd give it to the government. There are quite a lot of agricultural intervention programs that have been going on right from time, and this government has come and introduced quite its own, where the government came and declared a state of emergency in the food sector, and has done quite a lot. But you see, as a player in the sector, one of the major challenges, you asked me how have they fared, but let me start with identifying one of the things that has made most of these interventions counterproductive, is that there has been no synchrony. You see, different NGOs are carrying out agricultural interventions, government parastatals are carrying out interventions, ministries are carrying out interventions, but it just seems to be like there is a repeat process. There is no synchrony of data. One farmer who is lucky to have access to information, or who is, in quotes, in the Nigerian parlance, connected, can be receiving multiple interventions. Meanwhile, there is another farmer who is in his village and has not even had access to one intervention. So these projects have been faring to the best of their capacity. You would look at the Anchor Borrower Scheme, it had to be stopped. To the best of my knowledge, I don't think it is ongoing currently, because of the rate of default by farmers, by the so-called farmers. And you also found out that the criteria for accessing or benefiting from a scheme like the Anchor Borrower Scheme was a criteria that was above the head of the average smallholder farmer in Nigeria. So you had some middlemen, in quotes, take advantage of the situation and rip farmers off, thereby reducing the ability of farmers to repay back the Anchor Borrower Scheme, and a whole lot of other projects that have been carried out. You have people who come in and are able to write their names and are able to provide certain data that is required from farmers. The average smallholder farmer in Nigeria does not have data of of the number of trees, the number of crops he planted last year, what was the size of his bed, and all this. He is just doing a cultural practice that he repeats over time and time again. But there is a young man in the city that is preparing a business plan, that is making very, very humongous projections, and is submitting these things to the banks, submitting these things to the institutions, and he is the one that gets to get this access. So where am I heading to? These interventions are well intentioned. These interventions are interventions that, if well implemented, would create a serious positive dent, positive impact on the food production system of Nigeria. But then again, they have not been well implemented. There is no synchrony of data. If an NGO is in Borno State providing fertilizers to farmers, government should not be in that particular place again providing fertilizers. Probably they should be providing extension services on how to use those fertilizers. Probably they should be providing irrigation services. So if you bring in, if you do a critical analysis of all the interventions, you will find that there are overlapping, there are duplications of these interventions, there are duplications of these activities. And I'm sure professor who is in a research institution will agree with me that there is a demography of farmers that have consistently been benefiting from this thing. And these people, we usually call them portfolio farmers. They are not the real food producers. 80% of them, barely 20% of the beneficiaries are actual farmers who get these interventions, put them in their farm, and then get yield based on these interventions. So my answer here is two ways. One, these interventions are properly well intended. They are interventions that we should welcome and implement well. But we have to go back to the drawing board and ensure that we design it in such a way that the real food producers become beneficiaries of this intervention, so that we begin to benefit from the impacts, which are real, the realistic impacts of these schemes. Thank you so much.
Come back to you, Professor. Now, Professor, I reckon you understand why I had to ask Mr. Black that question. I hope you didn't mind my asking him first, because, of course, you represent that particular organization or entity, as he were. So I had to ask it neutral. But very quickly, in a few seconds, Professor, because we need to redeem the time. There's a lot of other things I really want you to share your expert insight regarding. But quickly, if you want to respond to what Mr. Black has said, in a few words, please, Professor.
There's a lot more that can be done. I also agree with him that the major challenge has been that both the governance structures themselves and the other players on the field are working in silos. Then the third thing I want to add is that both public and private organizations are not working according to laid down policies and regulations. You have a player who is a regulator being active in the field. It's like a referee playing a football match. With the anchor borrowers program, you have the central bank leaving aside the Bank of Agriculture, leaving aside all enabling structures to start, leaving aside the private banks to start giving access to this. So these are the kind of issues that actually bedevil well-intentioned programs. And so what is actually needed is not new programs, is to ensure that programs are carried out in a manner that are output-oriented, not a process-oriented activity. That very quickly is the major issue.
Okay. Now, Professor, let's take our minds to some other tangents, so to speak, because essentially the entity governing the entire country is centralized. And some stakeholders seem to think that that particular, system is the problem, where it leaves the states looking up to the center to provide them food. Now, let's look at other parts of the world. This might be, some might consider this an inequitable comparison, but take the USA, for instance. You hardly see the federal government calling all the 50 state governors to, talk about this sort of matters. Instead, it's the states are empowered to do these things for themselves. They take care of the production and distribution based on the principle of comparative advantage, as it were. Now, looking down further, you see that the states they control water resources, they control agricultural inputs. What the federal does, for all intents and purposes, is put the laws forward that would enable financing, enable essentially, guardrails and infrastructure, basically. But the states take care of it. So do you agree, or do you share the sentiments that perhaps our system has been enabling our problems?
Not really. It's the same thing. Our system is...
Professor, are you there? Professor, can you hear me? All right, let's go to Mr. Black, see if he's there. Mr. Black, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. I can hear you.
Okay, Professor, please go on. Professor, go on, please.
I'm supposed to give... Me? I can hear you. I don't know if you're hearing me.
Black, go on.
Okay. So the federal government is expected to provide policy, create an enabling environment for agricultural policy to be implemented. The active players on the ground are the states and the local government. As a matter of fact, the federal government cannot insist on a particular policy to be implemented, on a particular agricultural policy to be implemented in a particular state. It still has to be passed through the laws of the state. So the real challenge is, how do we get our various stakeholders to play their role, the local government and the state government in particular? I was part of a group that is trying to also refine the agricultural extension policy, and part of that policy act is that it will first of all be passed as an act by the House of Assembly, by the Senate and the House of Reps. But it's not going to be effective in the state. The states have to respectively adopt that. So the major challenge has been that our state and local governments are not playing an active role. Yes, using the United States that you give an example, 3% of Americans are involved in agriculture. They feed America and a significant proportion of the world. 70% of Nigerians are involved in agriculture. We cannot feed ourselves. It's a lack of an enabling environment. Both the federal, states, and local have a role to play. We could go on, but where we could stop is, how can the federal government strengthen the local and state government to play their roles as defined in the Constitution? You say, who should provide grassroots extension? It's the state and local governments.
All right. Now, Professor, I'm still going to stick with you for this one. Just like I was speaking with Mr. Black earlier about some of the interventions of the government, another one, again, which I forgot to mention, was the recent declaration of, duty-free importation of certain listed food items into the country, albeit temporary. Now, that's laudable for all intents and purposes. Nigerians loved it. I particularly loved it. But just last week, I reckon if it was last week, the modality toward the implementation of said declaration, as it were, or said directive, to a large extent, according to most stakeholders, fell short of the expectation to help curb what we're facing in the moment. Because the report, according to that particular guideline, it provides that only companies that have the capacity to mill 100 tons per day and have been in business for at least 5 years will be allowed to import rice paddy. Now, if you take this token into if you take this particular token into account, essentially you're cutting out a large swathe of the market, especially in the south, because a lot of these people that have this wherewithal, so to speak, are up north. So you're cutting out millions of southern market. Lagos, for instance, has a rice mill at Imota, right? Which badly needs paddy rice, and it does need that in order to save the entire, or to serve, beg your pardon, the entire South. But it hasn't particularly been in business for a very long time. So is it smart at this point in time to have that particular clause, or that particular caveat for, this duty-free importation?
You see, part of the challenge we face as a nation, like Daniel said, it's most of the decisions taken are reactive and are not informed decision basis. Beyond even looking at this now, immediately I saw that the major challenge I felt was for the smallholder farmers. You need to give me 2 minutes. You will find that now cost of production, that is at farm level, has doubled or tripled in terms of cost of fertilizers, cost of labor. Now, these imports are likely to come in at the time of harvest, suggesting that the smallholder farmer is not likely to recoup his investments unless he has a place to store and sell later. So I'm just telling you that the problem is even much wider than what you said. Yes, I do not really understand the reasoning why they have excluded some larger organizations that have demand. But it may be possible that even using some of this, using the skills of 5 years and below and size of the companies, it may be possible that they want to restrict it to ensure that the lower scale processors have access to produce and they're the ones that benefit from that strategy. So the real issue is we don't know, or it is not clearly stated what informed government decision along this line. So if one had a proper understanding of what information they used to make this, but from a superficial analysis, I would say that it may not be very positive if it's implemented as it is.
The worry is why transport to the north and then retransport parboiled rice to the south, when Lagos can easily get the job done at a much lower cost. But that's a lingering concern. Let's come back to you, Mr. Black, as we round up. Let's talk financing at this point in time. A lot has been said about, financing, particularly for smallholder farmer, which you also made reference to much earlier, and I did say we're going to come back to. So as we round up very quickly, what are your thoughts regarding that? And you want to kindly juxtapose that, if you will, please, with climate smart solutions as we close.
Okay, thank you very much. Like I have always said, there is a high level of financial illiteracy among smallholder farmers in Nigeria, and then the requirements that banks and financial institutions have to be able to provide financing and support to the agricultural sector. Most times these farmers do not have access to, and that has created a gap that has allowed middlemen in the name of business developers to rip farmers off, give them false promises and all. So we need to do a reality check on our system. We need the banking sector to design a fit for all financial system for our farmers. If it means state government having to guarantee farmers, if it means financial institutions having to do PPPs with input providers, providing finance in the standard and the already existing way does not fit smallholder farmers. If you tell smallholder farmers go to the bank and ask for a loan, if you tell smallholder farmers World Bank is giving out a grant, go and apply for it, I tell you that 90% of actual smallholder farmers will not meet up the criteria for those loans. We need grants that are realistic to the farmers. So what kind of data are you looking for? We need to be able to, before we start doing this, we need to have how we can help farmers keep data, because the banking sector will ask you records of your sales, records of your inputs, records of your this, records of your that, and they are actually needed records. So I am not saying that they shouldn't ask for this, but we need to begin to design systems. If the bank says that these records are quite important, then we need to begin to empower the digital space, empower tech people to build up apps, build up systems that are farmer friendly. We need to begin to provide farmers with infrastructure to help them help them meet up this criteria. Financing is very, very important. Financing is key.
Okay.
But the gap here is that the criteria to get finance and the people that need this finance cannot meet up, and we need to start talking about that design system. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much, Mr. Black. We do appreciate your time. Unfortunately, the time is pretty short, and you know what they say, it does fly by very fast when you are having fun, and I reckon that I have been having fun for the last 15 minutes or thereabout talking about these issues, which of course affect every Nigerian, as he were, and affects the Nigerian state as a whole. Gentlemen, I would like to say a very, very big thank you to you, first of all, Professor Christogonus Daudu, a professor and subject matter specialist, farming systems and soil science at the National Agricultural Extension and Research Liaison Services, Ahmadu Bello University, Zaria. Many thanks, Professor, for joining us on the program this morning.
you.
Hopefully we will have you at another time to discuss more issues. And also Mr. Black, Mr. Daniel Black, that is, a youth development advocate and consultant, as well as National Head YALI Network Nigeria. Many thanks for joining us on the program today. Apologies, the time
Thank you
is
for
short.
having me.
Again, as I said, hopefully we would have you both, or perhaps individually, at another time. Much has been said about the issues plaguing us, especially in the agri sector, and worsening day after day, especially when we're talking about twin disasters like drought and flooding, and of course inconsistent rainfall, issues of climate change, all put together to form a potpourri of impediments to our food production and thereby threatening food security. But of course, Professor, who is an expert, and of course Mr. Daniel, who's an expert in some regard, have preferred their solutions to the matters. I hope you did enjoy their submissions so far. That's Market Insights on Souk News Television this morning. Very quick look at the currency market before we go. On the official market, the dollar is trading to the naira at 1,525 naira, the pound sterling 2,045 naira, to the euro 1,733 naira, to the dollar, that's on the parallel market this time, 1,589 naira, to the pound sterling 2,101 naira, to the euro 1,775 naira. That is what it looks like in the currency market, both the official and parallel market. Many thanks for watching Market Insight today. Do stay close to your mobile devices and your TV set on Souk News Television. More programming continues shortly. Until tomorrow when Market Insight returns. Do have a wonderful day. I am David Chiedu. Good morning.